So what I got here is Dr. G explains, and so he's a behavioural expert and a body language expert. And what I've personally found, because I come from a very different field, I'm an ecological psychologist, so I'm interested in human-environment interaction. I tend to have a more sort of holistic, enmeshed view of the way everything works. And then so I've always found body language and some of this behavioural unit stuff quite reductionist and quite narrow-focused. That doesn't make it wrong, and it doesn't make either of us wrong. But I wanted to kind of show how I interpreted things differently to the way Dr. G interprets it here, and I just found that difference fascinating. So again, anything I say following this doesn't mean that I'm saying he's wrong. It's just that I have a very different professional point of view to him, and that when you're listening to two experts, you have to remember we have our own biases and reflexivity to think of. We have our own epistemological point of view, and epistemology is just basically your view of the world and how the world works. Like a materialist kind of sees everything as only the real matters, and only matter matters, literally. Whereas, so this basically means that me and him are going to view things in a very different way. And it's up to you to make the decision of who's right and who's wrong, based on the evidence that we give.
Hey everybody, Dr. G here. I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist as well as a body language expert, and today we're going to be analyzing the behavior and body language of Luigi Mangione.
So, clinical forensic psychologist is mainly working with the mental health of people within the prison system and people who have basically mental health difficulties and they're criminally inclined. So his qualifications mean that he's definitely got a very honed and learned perspective, but it does mean that he might potentially be quite narrowed into his field and see things in a very specific way. Again, doesn't mean he's wrong. It doesn't mean I'm wrong either, or that either of us is right.
Luigi Mangione was recently arrested as the prime suspect for the murder of Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare. Before we get started with this, a couple of quick things. One, I wanted to make sure you know this is not a psychological evaluation of any kind. These are just my opinions. In addition to that, I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, let's go.
So if you're wondering why an expert usually gives a disclaimer like that, particularly a psychologist about to talk about the body language and behavior of somebody who's about to undergo a trial, it's because they're experts, which means that their opinion carries weight to a public audience. So anything he says might become entrenched in your mind and affect your view of the case or the individual, which could be very bad for that person, and they could get sued for defamation and things like that, or sued for malpractice and struck off. So that's why everything he's giving is his opinion, and it's because it can only be his opinion because he's not directly involved as a forensic clinical psychologist in this case, and then so he's not privy to a lot of the information that people working on this case on a daily basis or people that are his caseworker will have access to. So this can only be his opinion.
Now, we don't have a lot of footage, but we're going to look at a couple of clips today to see what we can glean from his behavior and his body language. Let's jump right in. Now, the first thing I want you to pay attention to is the position of his chin and his nose, the way his neck is very exposed. Now, when we're feeling very vulnerable, we put our chin down. We try to protect our neck because it's a very vulnerable location. But when we put our chin up, that shows that we don't feel threatened by others. It's a sign of confidence. Some people will interpret it as arrogance. It really depends on the context of the situation. But as he's doing this right now, he doesn't hang his head down in shame. Let's go back and then we're going to keep watching.
Okay, so something I find interesting here is that I would have quite liked to know some of the actual research that has gone into understanding and knowing that and coming to that conclusion that, all right, we can display certain things when we're feeling a certain way, but it's that, so if you're feeling non-threatened, you hold your chin up, and if you're feeling threatened, you hold your chin down. That's one thing. But then when he goes into talking about the evolutionary background to it, about the exposure and the protection, how do they go to that extra level of detail? So it's one thing being able to say, by researching a whole bunch of people in different settings, and then people tend to lift their neck up when they're confident and put their head down when they're vulnerable. That's that's one thing to say, but then to say it's because of you need to protect your neck, or you don't need to protect your neck, so that's why you don't feel threatened. That is like an extra level, because I would imagine that it comes from animal research, where you see it in a lot of mammals. Like if you have a cat, and your cat rolls over and shows off her belly, it doesn't mean that she wants you to stroke her. It just means that, oh look, I feel safe around you. Here's my soft underbelly, because they could be eviscerated if you're a danger. So they're showing you, they don't see you as a danger. And I'm wondering if they're extrapolating that from animal research and applying it to human behavior, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because we do it in all fields of psychology very often, particularly when it comes between mammals, different species of mammals to human, because we're so closely biologically, genetically related. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to say is that the research that goes into these things, no human is identical to all other humans, right? Especially in terms of our behavior. This is when I talk about like an enmeshed, holistic perspective, that I try and see the population as a whole. Whereas an expert like him takes the knowledge he's got and applies it to the individual, where I'm sitting here thinking, okay, so he's showing off this stance, but does that really mean that he feels that way? Because without having the baseline for that individual, you can't know that this is definitely what this is. So you can't say he's definitely showing off his neck because he feels not threatened. He doesn't feel vulnerable and he's showing confidence. Because not all humans do everything 100% of the time in the same way. So you could get a study and you could look at 100 different people, and then say you're getting them to all feel confident, and not all of them will expose their neck like that. Some of them might do something different with their head. They might have a different facial expression. And so what we really need to know, I think, in videos like this is, well, okay, so he's showing off his neck. This happens in 68% of cases. That's the number I pulled out of my arse. I don't know if that is the number, because it tends to be about a third or 2/3 or something, usually. So if 68% of people do this, then that means that there's a probability here that he feels confident. So I don't think you can definitively say that about somebody.
He's also walking with a good amount of intensity. Look at this right here.
See, I'm not seeing it like that. I'm seeing that he's kind of like led. And yeah, he is very aware of his surroundings.
He's keeping his chin up, like I said, keeping his neck exposed. Oftentimes when people are feeling shame, they're going to look down, and when they're feeling defensive, they're going to block their neck. So when they're looking down in shame, that's not necessarily defensiveness. That's not wanting people to see their face. He doesn't seem to be ashamed.
But also shy people do that as well. Shy people put their heads down. And also people who are masking will behave in this way. So they're not really feeling what they're showing. They can actually be masking other feelings and presenting something different. Particularly, say if he was autistic, for example, or he had some other neurodivergency, then it could be very well be that he's masking. And obviously we don't know at this stage what his mental health status actually is.
Ashamed of anything, and he may be experiencing fear right now, but that's not obvious. He's not showing body language associated with fear. Let's watch this sequence all over once again.
Okay, so when he's talking about fear, I actually think he looks like he's in shock, because his face is very blank, and he's kind of being led, and he's kind of like staggering about a bit. Again, that's just my interpretation. I could be completely wrong on this.
One thing you're seeing is that he's looking around very casually. Now, that may not mean much to you, but one of the things they're going to be, I'm sure, exploring here is whether or not he's got some sort of severe mental health issue, whether or not he's disconnected from reality. There's nothing obvious about that right now. If there are those kinds of issues, he seems organized enough to recognize the situation. He seems to appear to know what's going on around him. You're not seeing a blank stare or any unusual sort of looks on his face.
And this is the kind of thing that I think you can kind of trust what he's saying on this, because being a clinical forensic psychologist, he would have worked with people, assessing them for their mental health status, and he's specifically looking for these signs in terms of seeing if somebody is with it or not, or if they're under the influence of something, or if they've got severe mental health problems like schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder or something like that. all of these things I can actually talk about on my stream if people are interested.
He's also taking big strides. Once again, there does seem to be a certain degree of confidence with what's going on right now. And maybe there's a sense of pride. There doesn't seem to be any obvious shame, though. Now we're going to see him going into court for an extradition hearing because they're going to try to extradite him to New York.
We need to do it, and it's completely out of touch, and it's insult to the intelligence of the American people and the lived experience.
So I talked about the intensity before. We're seeing that much more clearly now. Let's see if we can see a little bit more of his face.
We need to do it, and it's completely out of touch, and
You can see he's baring his teeth. He's got his brow furrowed down. Those are obvious signs of anger.
Now the thing is here, like, he is very clearly presenting with anger, but again, you can't know that he's actually feeling that right now without that baseline. And if you pause a video on anybody pulling any kind of facial expression, you could end up with a bunch of different emotions depending on where you freeze frame it, you know, from microsecond to microsecond. And it's very easy, particularly if you lived with a life of masking, to pretend to be angry. Because I could really fucking look angry right now. And then, you know, but I'm not. I'm perfectly calm. I'm quite happy. So that's why you have to be careful with this, because you need to know when they're doing things like this.
Once again, he has his chin up. He's standing up straight. There's anger. There's confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I talked to the last one about how he doesn't look disorganized. We don't know whether there's anything mental health-wise. This behavior, I'm sure, is going to bring more of that into question. I don't know his mental health background, but I'm sure that will be explored in court. Let's keep watching.
and it's insult to the intelligence of the American people and the lived experience. We need to do it, and it's completely out of touch, and it's insult to the intelligence of the American people and the lived experience.
Now, I want you to pay a close attention to his facial expressions here, because I talked about anger before, but this seems more like rage. And if he is, in fact, guilty of what he's been accused of, you're maybe getting a better idea of the level of rage that he may be experiencing.
Now, I do think that that is a bit of an extrapolation there that is very difficult to make this firmly. First of all, I would like a definition of what the difference is between anger and rage, and how you can tell the difference between the two. And I think there's certainly a correlation with the fact that he is the alleged killer of this guy, of the CEO. But to extrapolate his feelings of being treated unjustly with the extradition treaty to New York, when he feels he should be tried in Pennsylvania, and at the same time being pulled around by the police when he's trying to talk to the media. So in that moment, those momentary feelings of anger, to extrapolate that then to the rage that he felt with the murder, I think that's very difficult to do, because you don't know what he is specifically angry about right now. And then, yeah, like I say, we really need to have like an understanding of that escalation into rage and what might cause that and how you can tell the difference.
We need to do it, and it's completely out of touch.
See, you can really see the brow and the...
But to me, that's just somebody like being fed up of being shoved around and just trying to shout to the camera and just try and get your point across. And then this whole baring of the teeth thing, people bare their teeth all the time when they're talking normally, and then he's trying to shout here and he's being pushed into a wall. And do you notice how many police officers were with him? That was quite weird. We don't have that in the UK.
baring of the teeth there truly appears to be furiosity, anger, rage below whatever it is he's saying. I still can't fully understand what he's saying, but it seems to be something about the intelligence of the American people.
He said this is unjust, it's an insult to the American people, this is a lived experience. I've heard other footage of it, and with captions, and that does seem to be what he's saying, just so people know.
An insult to the intelligence of the American people, it's a lived experience.
Now that was real rage right there. You heard he stomped.
And I wanted to bring up that as well. He didn't stomp. It sounded like something, like his foot or somebody else's foot or something, collided with the door or the threshold. It didn't sound like a stomp at all, and so I think that mishearing something like that can lead to affecting how you're experiencing something visually or audibly.
And if you see his face, let me see if I can get a good shot of his face right here. Look at the rage right there. You heard him stomp and then say this. There seems to be a truly burning rage inside of him as he says this, to let out that stomp, to let out that furiosity while he has police leading him. Oftentimes people feel the need to behave in a certain way in situations like this. Oftentimes there's some degree of compliance. I'm not saying he should or shouldn't or anything like that. I'm just saying that typically what we see. Right here, we're seeing somebody that does not care about the context of what's going on. He has something he wants to say, and the rage below it all is just exploding forth.
The intelligence of the American people has lived experience.
We'll go ahead and stop here. Hopefully this is giving you a better idea of some of the behavior and body language we're already seeing from him. Now, something that was said in court.
So I just want to stop there because I just want to show you like this. So we're talking about the rage and anger. Remember I said about how if you stop a video at any different point, milliseconds apart, somebody's face can look very different. Well, look at him there. He doesn't look angry. He looks like he's talking to one of his mates. He's trying to get his attention. So to me, this is why I like the freeze frames to get evidence. That's why that doesn't sit right with me. Again, I'm not saying anybody's right or wrong. That's just the way that I'm perceiving it from my perspective.
They asked him if he had any drug or mental health issues, and he said no on both accounts. Now, one thing to be very clear on is that for people that have either substance or mental health issues, typically are going to answer no to that question unless they have a very well-documented history that somehow is relevant. But we can't assume that that's necessarily true. This is going to be a very long and complicated process. I'm sure we will find out more as we continue to go on. But just because he said there's no drugs or mental health, I don't think you can take things like that at face value. Not suggesting there are those issues, but you just can't eliminate them just based on him saying that. Obviously, we saw today someone who is expressing an intense amount of rage, someone who doesn't seem to have any shame right now, and someone who also appears very confident in this situation. But whether or not there are underlying mental health issues that are related to that, I'm sure we will find out. If you have any other thoughts, please let me know in the comments below. Last thing before we get finished up is I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, thanks for watching.
I enjoyed that video, even though I disagreed with a lot of what he said. I think he presented his case pretty well.